The article that I will be reviewing today is titled U.S. News, Funding-Strapped Parks Get Creative, and it was published by the Wall Street Journal on January 17th. It is essentially about how budget cuts have left state parks desperate for funding in order to keep the parks open. So, this could mean turning to corporate sponsors. The major points of this article are that the cuts to the Parks Department have been increasing throughout the years, and more of them are being forced to support themselves by turning to the only funding that they can find, corporate sponsorships. State parks are considering finding sponsors or selling their naming rights to come up with the money to keep the parks open and running. Many of the residents are worried that this will damage the atmosphere in the park and will turn it into one big advertisement, similar to that of sports stadiums. In 2015, Wisconsin lawmakers eliminated all state tax support for the Department of Natural Resources, which oversees state parks. This led to a $1.4 million deficit in the park's funding. Many lawmakers, including Wisconsin State Senator John Erpenbach, are opposed to corporate sponsorships, saying he hopes that the Wisconsin state parks don't go that way, and that the less state invests in the parks, the more corporations will step in and take over. However, this is not just happening in Wisconsin. In Virginia, the park system partnered with North Face in 2010, and their logos were on trailhead signs throughout the park. But as of today, the partnership is no longer active. In Alabama, the legislature redirected about $15 million from the Parks Department from 2010 and caused 5 Alabama state parks to close in 2015. But not all states approve of cutting off their parks funding, and the voters in Alabama approved a constitutional amendment to block this legislature from diverting funds from the Parks Department. This relates to last week's class because parks are now being forced to have strategic competitiveness and strategic advantage. Parks need to be open in order to compete with other tourist attractions, and in lieu of tax revenues, many parks have to turn to corporate sponsors in order to stay open and have an advantage over other forms of business. This also goes towards the businesses supporting the parks. They get brand recognition for supporting the local community and get an advantage through that. There's not much of an opinion in this article, it is mostly just facts. However, it may seem that the author is against the idea of corporate sponsorship, since most of the quotes are against the corporate interference. Will Connors, the author, is the Midwest correspondent of the Wall Street Journal's Chicago Bureau, and he has had a lot of experience in foreign countries like Nigeria, Brazil, and Canada, and covers a lot of breaking news. He does have experience in politics and public policy, so I do think that his opinion would be qualified. I am neither for nor against his opinion. I agree that having a lot of corporate sponsors would take away from the experience, but I also think that it could be worth it in order to have a park at all. Since the parks departments are starting to be forced to come up with their funding independently, it will have to have a strategy to stay competitive, and this is definitely a way to do it.